Welcome everyone. My name is Jenny Smithers and I am the convener of Lighter Footprints. I would like to start by acknowledging the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation as the traditional owners of the land on which we meet, and I pay my respects. I am going to give an incredibly brief outline of the current state of our climate and Australia's emissions. Then we will hear from someone who is too young to vote, but she has a voice here tonight, Ivy Sheng. Then the candidates, Jackie Carter Greens, Clive Crosby Labor, and Monique Ryan Independent. For those of you who don't know, we received an email today at 1:08 p.m. from Amelia Hamer telling us that she would not be attending. My professional life has been working as a GP, so no surprise, my first message is from the medical world. Some of you may have heard of one of the world's most prestigious medical journals, The Lancet. The Lancet's position is, as you can read, climate change is the greatest global health threat facing the world in the 21st century. But it is also the greatest opportunity to redefine the social and environmental determinants of health. You will have heard and you've experienced that the last 10 years have been the hottest years on record, and that 2024 was the hottest year ever on record. This graph shows the global mean temperature above the 1850 to 1900 average, and it relates to the time period 1815 to 2024. You can see, even in the last 12 years since the first Kooyong Candidate Forum in 2007, there has been a significant uptick in the global mean temperature. It is not good when your doctor looks worried when they are talking to you about your health. Well, the climate scientists are extremely worried about the sharp rise in the global mean temperature. Temperatures are rising faster than expected. You all know that the world is getting hotter because greenhouse gases in our atmosphere are trapping heat. And you may be familiar with this graph. The graph shows the level of CO2 in the atmosphere from 800,000 years ago to today. How do we know what the CO2 level was 800,000 years ago? The measurements are taken using CO2 concentration from bubbles trapped in East Antarctic ice cores. The most recent measurements, shown in red, are taken directly from air samples. In February 2025, the concentration had risen to 427 parts per million, way up the top. We cannot keep putting more CO2 into our atmosphere, nor other greenhouse gases, especially highly warming methane, natural gas. What is our part as Australians as contributing to climate pollution? This graph shows Australia's CO2 emissions, excluding land use and land use change and forestry, in 2022. The grey bar graph above the central line shows our domestic emissions compared to other countries. The red bar graph below the central line shows our exported CO2 emissions, coal and gas. There we are. We're not on the podium, but we're up there. In 2022, Australia was the fourth largest fossil fuel exporter. Australia's global fossil fuel carbon footprint is at least 3 times larger than our domestic footprint. The International Energy Agency has clearly said there should be no new fossil fuel development if the world is to limit warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius, the Paris Agreement's temperature goal. Yet, Australia continues to approve new fossil fuel exploration and production. Are we on track to keep our climate safe? At present, the answer is no. A rise of 3 degrees Celsius by the end of this century is not safe. The next slide is produced by Climate Action Tracker. Climate Action Tracker is an independent scientific project that tracks government climate action and measures it against the globally agreed Paris Agreement aim of holding warming well below 2 degrees and, to look after Ivy and her cohort, pursuing efforts to limit warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius. Here is a slide depicting Australia's emissions over time with projections of what course Australia's emissions need to be on to achieve possible temperature rise outcomes by the end of the century. Climate Tracker's overall rating for Australia's emission reduction actions for 2024, as you can read, insufficient. Note that the blue line, which charts Australia's actual domestic emissions, is in the orange zone of insufficient for a less than 3 degrees Celsius world. The green line charts where Australia's emissions need to be 1.5 degrees Celsius compatible, assuming our nation will play its part in keeping the climate safe. Australia is using up its carbon budget. Australia could be on track. Renewable energy with storage is growing. Rapid conversion of our electricity to renewables will give us time to manage the emissions from other sectors. We have not a moment to lose, and every action we take now gives our children and their children a better climate future. You are probably familiar with this statement by American environmentalist and author Bill McKibben. Winning slowly is the same as losing. My final slide is a statement of the key findings from the Australian Security Leaders Climate Group report May 2024. They said, climate disruption now presents the greatest and potentially existential threat to society and human security in Australia and around the world. A new insecurity shadows our lives and the relations between nations. The Asia-Pacific, the highest risk region in the world, faces devastating climate impacts, and Australia, as a hot and dry continent, is particularly vulnerable. So, some of the most trusted members in our society, the doctors, scientists, and the military, are telling us we are in trouble. We need to listen to those voices. And now, I would like to welcome a young voice, Ivy Sheng. Let me tell you about Ivy. Ivy Sheng is a 16-year-old student from Kooyong who cares deeply about climate action and the world her generation will inherit. She's been involved with the Australian Youth Climate Coalition for the past 4 years, working alongside other young people to push for meaningful change. While the scale of the crisis can feel overwhelming, she's hopeful about what communities can achieve when they come together. And she believes it's time to turn that hope into action. Let's welcome Ivy again.
Hello everyone, and thank you so much to Lighter Footprints for inviting me to speak tonight at the Kooyong Candidates Forum. This forum is a vital opportunity to hear from our candidates and, most importantly, to reflect on the kind of future that we want to build. My name is Ivy Sheng, and I'm a Year 10 student who lives in Kooyong, and I'm really grateful to be able to share my thoughts with all of you today. Obviously, I'm not a politician or an expert, but I am someone who cares a lot about the future. I made contact with Lighter Footprints because I felt the need to be environmentally active in the community where I live. I'm here tonight because I believe that climate change is one of the most critical issues that we face. And I really want to talk about what that kind of means for my generation and for the generations that come after us. As a young kid, I didn't really think much about climate change. I didn't grow up in a household that talked very much about political issues, and so for the longest time, climate change felt to me like some kind of buzzword. I would hear it all the time, but I didn't really know what it meant. It was kind of like something that people talked about, but in these kind of half-hearted, incomplete ways, where the root of the issue wasn't really addressed, and neither were solutions proposed. In the summer of 2019 and 2020, the bushfires happened. I was in Year 5, and I was locked down during the pandemic, and watching the news in disbelief. At school, I remember doing an activity where we had to cut out these images of houses engulfed in flames. And I'm sure some of you might have seen it before, but this iconic image of a kangaroo fleeing a wall of fire and the sky turning an eerie red. It was real, and it was terrifying. My family and I came to Australia when I was 5 years old, and this country has given us so much. It's given a high standard of living, breathtaking natural beauty, and a democratic system where voices are meant to be heard and to be reflected in the actions of our leaders. I want that same Australia for my kids and for their kids as well. But climate change is already shaping their future, and it's shaping mine too. The cost of living crisis, extreme weather events, and environmental degradation are all interconnected. I want the future generations to have the same opportunities that my parents gave me, but that future is at risk. This election is going to be a historic one because Gen Z and millennials are going to be outnumbering baby boomers for the first time. So, the decisions that we make today aren't just going to shape the next 3 years, but they're going to shape the future and set the tone for decades to come. I used to tell a lot of my friends that climate change isn't a political issue, and that's something that I really regret now, because what I meant was that it shouldn't be a political issue. Something that's so basic to our survival should not be something that's up for debate. But the reality is that climate change is a political issue. Just like education and cultural safety and the right to have your identity respected. A healthy and safe climate is a basic human need and a need that needs to be protected. I often hear that my generation is the last to live in the world as we know it. But I think we should reframe that. We're also the first generation to really wake up to this crisis, and luckily for us, we do have the technology and willpower and imagination to actually do something about it. Democracy comes from the Greek word demos and kratos, so it literally means rule by the people. Forums like this one are going to help us to make informed decisions when we vote in the upcoming election. So for that, I'm really grateful for your commitment. Every vote matters. And we don't have to sacrifice the well-being of future generations in order to live comfortably today. I truly believe that both are possible, but that's only if we work together. So thank you so much.
Ivy, thank you for your wise words. I am confident there would be no one sitting in this room or watching online who would disagree with the validity of your plea. For all of us to act now to protect your future and the future of all our children and their children. We have heard Ivy's request. Now we will find out if the three candidates who've come have policies to safeguard our climate. I'd like to welcome our moderator, Victoria McKenzie-McHarg. Victoria is the CEO of Women's Environmental Leadership Australia and has worked in climate and environmental leadership for the past 17 years. Her former roles include Chair of the Climate Action Network Australia, Climate Campaign Manager of the Australian Conservation Foundation, and Manager of Strategy at Bank Australia. Please welcome again, Victoria. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jenny. It's a real pleasure to be with you all here tonight. This is not my first time at a Kooyong Candidates Forum, and every time it is a full house, and hello again to those of you who are joining us online. It's quite an incredible thing to see. In the 17 years, shockingly longer than Ivy has been alive, that I have been at this work, which is, sorry Ivy, shocking and disappointing and not what the plan was at the start. In that time, I have attended dozens of different community events and forums, and it is always Kooyong that does it best. Democracy here is alive and well, thanks to you all. You have an option to choose from candidates who have a range of different policies. Candidates and parties have a choice about what policies they want to put forward, and candidates have a choice about whether they want to even show up for this discussion with you all tonight. Thank goodness for democracy. I do want to, though, say a huge thank you and congratulations right at the start of the night to Lighter Footprints, to Jenny and the team who have been at this work for 2 decades and have done an incredible job. You do not get turnouts like this in every electorate across the country, because not every electorate can have a local group that is driving and persisting and educating and engaging in the way this group has. You have an enormous asset in your community, and I encourage you to get behind them, and I just personally say an enormous thanks to Jenny and the whole team, all of you who are here. Before we jump into it, though, I want to get a sense of who is in the room tonight, because sometimes we see accusations that these things are stacked. So I want to see a show of hands of who lives in the electorate of Kooyong. Keep your hand up and have a look around. So if anyone's got questions, this is absolutely a Kooyong's Candidates Forum, and it is the Kooyong community who our candidates are being accountable to. Hands up if this is the first time you've ever been to an event like this before. Ooh, welcome. Have a look around. That's actually a surprisingly high number for this community. Welcome. It is wonderful to have you here. Again, custodians of democracy. And democracy is under threat in many parts of the world where we were not perhaps expecting it to be, and your guardianship is a part of that, so thank you for being here. I'm going to invite our first candidate to the stage so that we can hear from her. Jackie Carter is the Greens candidate for Kooyong. Jackie is a dedicated and long-time Kooyong local with over 2 decades of experience in the pharmaceutical sector across roles spanning retail, training, project implementation and management. A passionate advocate for climate action, social and economic justice and equality, she brings a deep commitment to creating a fairer and more sustainable future. As a lifelong renter, she champions rental reforms and improved living standards, understanding firsthand the urgent need for housing security and affordability. Acutely aware of the climate crisis, Jackie remains hopeful in the power of collective action to drive meaningful change. She believes that politics, when approached with kindness, empathy, and integrity, can foster greater understanding and deliver lasting positive outcomes for all. Please welcome Jackie to the stage.
Hello, thank you, Victoria, so much for that introduction, and I'd also like to extend my gratitude to Lighter Footprints for once again hosting this really vital community service. These discussions are the cornerstone of our democracy, and I deeply value the opportunity to speak with you all this evening. And before I begin, I do also want to acknowledge that we are meeting on stolen and unceded Wurundjeri and Woiwurrung land. And this fact is not lost on me, that as we are here to discuss the critical issue of protecting our environment, our climate, our planet, from the harms that colonisers introduced to this very country and have continued to decimate this land, a problem that we could so desperately learn from our First Nations people in how to overcome and care and protect for this land, as they have done for over 60,000 years. So, 3 years ago, I sat in this very building at the same forum ahead of the 2022 federal election. That election was hailed as the climate election. And Australians, including Kooyong, took action and voted for change. But the critical question remains, how much have we actually progressed? Since coming to power, Labor has approved over 32 new coal and gas projects. In the final hours of the last parliamentary term, they prioritised weakening our environmental laws, favouring multinational salmon corporations over our planet. Meanwhile, our alternative is Peter Dutton and the Liberals. They're doubling down on nuclear, which is expensive and dangerous, and just today have come out with their plan to classify gas as a critical mineral to ensure, and I quote, gas remains part of the Australian economy for decades. We irrefutably cannot afford a Liberal government in the next term of Parliament. The simple truth is this: coal and gas are the leading causes of the climate crisis. These corporations are making billions exporting fossil fuels while paying little to no tax. And instead of holding them accountable, both major parties continue to take millions in donations from the very industries destroying our future. We can't keep voting for the same two parties and expect a different result. But there is a way forward. The Greens are the only party fighting to stop more coal and gas while championing a bold plan for publicly owned renewable energy. Renewable energy is not only the safest option, it's almost also the cheapest option. By investing in a massive expansion of publicly owned renewables, we will slash power bills, create jobs, and achieve 100% renewable by 2030. Right now, billions in taxpayers' money is being funneled into subsidies and tax breaks for fossil fuel companies. We will redirect these funds into communities, climate solutions, and initiatives like subsidised solar and batteries for homes and communities. With more Greens in Parliament, we will keep Peter Dutton out and force Labor to act. The next government is likely to be a minority government, and this is our once-in-a-generation chance for real action. Under no circumstance will the Greens support a Liberal minority government. The last time we had a Labor minority government, the Greens secured $13 billion for clean energy. And we saw world-leading climate laws which saw Australia's emissions reduced for the first time in history. We can do it again. The choice is clear. If you want real climate action, you need more Greens in Parliament. Forget keeping below 1.5 degrees of warming. We've missed that. Australia is currently on track for nearly 3 degrees of warming. That is catastrophic failure of our leadership, and our planet is on its knees. But we have a chance to turn things around. I don't want to be at this forum in another 3 years' time talking about how we failed to act with the urgency and conviction this climate crisis demands. I want to be standing here and celebrating at the action we took together. So if climate action is your top priority this election, you and the planet can't afford not to vote Greens.
Thank you so much, Jackie. Our next candidate that we'll be hearing from this evening is Clive Crosby, who is the Labor candidate for Kooyong. Clive grew up and went to school in Kooyong and has a deep appreciation of our community. He briefly attended university, but quickly found that he was happier and better suited to being in the workforce. Clive has worked in the hospitality industry at venues in and around the Kooyong area, as well as working in the live performance and events industries. He has developed a strong passion for progressive politics and believes that the Australian Labor Party has a strong track record of governing in the interests of all Australians. He would be honoured to represent this community of Kooyong and be a part of a second-term Albanese Labor government that will continue to build Australia's future. Welcome to the stage, Clive.
Thank you so much for that introduction, Victoria. Good evening to you all. It gives me a lot of hope to see so many people in this room who are passionate about the issues that we're here to discuss tonight. And I appreciate your interest and advocacy in these matters, which means so much to me. I'm extremely proud to be standing as a candidate to represent Kooyong, as I've been lucky enough to grow up here and have lived here my whole life. Currently, not a single member of the federal parliament is from my generation, despite this cohort representing approximately 15% of enrolled voters according to the latest figures from the Electoral Commission. If elected as member for Kooyong, the perspective of a young person is one of my biggest strengths, which I would proudly bring to Canberra on Kooyong's behalf. Over time, I've grown deeply attached and formed a great appreciation for all the things that make Kooyong such a fantastic and vibrant community. I made the decision to put my hand up to be Labor's candidate because over the past 3 years, I've seen the Albanese government consistently demonstrate what a good and responsible government looks like. It has been such a stark contrast to Peter Dutton's Liberal opposition, as well as Scott Morrison's time in office and the years of coalition government that came before that under Abbott and Turnbull. The Albanese government has lifted Australia's climate ambition and laid the foundations for us to be a renewable energy superpower. But there's still more to do. It's absolutely necessary to ensure Australia doesn't get left behind as the world transitions to clean, decarbonised economies and heads towards net zero emissions by 2050. This target, which is now widely adopted across the globe, including by many of our key allies and trading partners, is just one of the climate initiatives that the Albanese government has passed in its first term. Our other achievements including the net zero by 2050 target in the acts governing the Clean Energy Finance Corporation, the Australian Renewable Energy Agency, and multiple other government bodies, including Export Finance Australia, CSIRO, etc., etc. This ensures that net zero by 2050 as a goal stays front of mind when key government bodies, departments, and other decision makers take these decisions. We've revised Australia's 2030 emissions reduction target from the previous Liberal government's measly 26% reduction on 2005 levels to a far more ambitious, yet still achievable 43%. We've given the safeguard mechanism legislated under the previous government teeth, which requires net emissions from our 215 largest carbon emitters to be reduced by 5% each and every year. We've put in place a $22.7 billion plan for a future made in Australia, which will enable Australia to capitalise on the job opportunities of becoming a renewable energy superpower, leveraging our world-class skills and natural resources and ensuring sovereign manufacturing in clean energy industries for things like solar panels rather than shipping out the critical minerals and importing the made solar panels back in. We've finalised legislation to allow the development of offshore wind farms. The Albanese government has offered feasibility licences in our Gippsland zone for the Star of the South project, as well as declaring our Hunter, Southern Ocean, Illawarra, Bass Strait and Bundaree offshore wind zones. Labor has passed the new vehicle efficiency standards legislation. This gives Australians more choice to purchase cars that are not only cleaner, but cheaper to run. This also deters vehicle manufacturers from using Australia as a dumping ground for older, more polluting, less reliable and more expensive to run models. The Albanese government has passed the electric vehicle discount to make EVs more affordable and increase electric car sales from around 2% when Labor came to office to 10% today. We've signed Australia up to the Global 30 by 30 initiative, which commits Australia to the protection and conservation of 30% of its land and 30% of its oceans by 2030. All states and territories have also signed on to this target. As a result of these policies, Australia is now halfway to reaching our 2030 target of 82% of electricity grid needs being generated by renewables, which is a target that Peter Dutton and the Liberals want to junk to pursue their nuclear fantasy at great cost to both our way of life, our safety and our ecosystem. Labor has cleaned up Australia's climate credibility after a decade of denial, delay and neglect. Labor is bringing down climate pollution now, with emissions now 7 million tonnes lower than in the final year of the Morrison government. which, keep in mind, was somewhat suppressed due to the COVID shutdowns. What Labor has accomplished thus far in its first term and will continue to work towards in a second term will help to protect the health and well-being of all Australians. Labor will ensure that Australia is prepared for the world's carbon neutral future. Thank you.
Thank you, Clive. The next candidate we're going to hear from tonight is Dr Monique Ryan, who is the independent candidate for Kooyong. Monique was elected as the member for Kooyong in May 2022. Before her move to Parliament, she was the director of the Royal Children's Hospital Neurology Department and a professor of medicine at Melbourne and Monash Universities. In her first term as the member for Kooyong, Monique has enjoyed being available and responsive to her community, as well as in her work in Parliament. She has served on the parliamentary committees on health, aged care and sport, the NDIS, and nuclear energy. She is committed to action on climate change to prevent further global warming, environmental disasters, and species extinction, and has advocated for greater integrity and transparency in government and for action on the cost of living and housing crises. Welcome to the stage, Monique.
Thank you so much, Victoria, for that introduction. Thank you also to Light of Footprints for holding this wonderful forum. And let me also acknowledge the fact that we are on the unceded lands of the Wurundjeri people. It's extraordinary to think that in 2022, I stood before you as an untested political candidate. And what I offered to the community then was a belief in science and in evidence-based policy. And I offered then the support of a community which was frustrated with political parties, which we know that have for decades failed to act on the existential challenge to our society. What I offered you then was my commitment to transparently represent our community as its independent federal member in a way that reflects your values and your beliefs, in a way that was based on evidence, on science and on expert opinion. I am so grateful to stand before you 3 years later with a parliamentary record which I think reflects that commitment to those priorities. And tonight I ask you for an opportunity to continue the work that we started together 3 years ago. The first law passed by the Albanese government in 2022 was the Climate Change Act, which set Australia's first legislated emissions targets. I was successful in proposing an amendment to that legislation, and since that time, I have been able to act as this community has wanted me to, in pushing the government to more rapidly advance decarbonisation of our economy, electrification of our communities, protection of our environment and biodiversity, and withdrawal from its active support of and commitment to fossil fuel industries. I supported the Safeguard Mechanism and the Capacity Investment Scheme, and I pushed the government on the Environmental Protection and Biodiversity Conservation Act. I advocated for greater support of green industry in the Future Made in Australia bill. I opposed the extension of government subsidised carbon capture and storage schemes, including the shameful sea dumping bill, which extended our ability to bury our carbon pollution under the seas of poorer countries like Timor-Leste. I campaigned successfully for fuel efficiency standards and for a cut in the luxury car tax discount, and we've already seen that electric vehicles, as a result of those changes, have become more affordable and more readily available. I've moved private members' bills against native forest logging and against seismic testing with the support and encouragement of members of climate organisations in this room. I've worked with affected communities to oppose the government's shameful funding of the Middle Arm gas precinct in the Darwin Harbour and the 3 billion carbon tonne bomb, which represents the fracking of the Beetaloo Basin. Locally, I've been able to support development of wonderful groups like Electrify Burundara, and I've fostered really productive relationships with groups focused on the health impact of climate change. I'm continuing to press for more funding for active transport routes within our community, including for state and federal support for the Hawthorn to Box Hill bike trail. I have to be fair to the government. It has made some progress in the last 3 years. It has adopted a renewable 82% target for this decade, and it's remarkable that we are now halfway towards powering our nation with renewable energy. The Albanese, it is worth a crack, actually. It's a good thing. The government has passed vehicle standards and it's legislated to limit industrial pollution. It has unlocked $87 billion of investment into renewable power, storage and transmission. But it has also broken a key election promise in not fixing our environmental protection laws, and has approved extension of 26 new gas and coal projects, despite there already being 120 of those in the pipeline. The Albanese government sees gas as part of our energy mix beyond 2050. It has no plan to rule out future fossil fuel developments. Meanwhile, we have a coalition opposition which has voted against every single law to cut climate pollution in the last 3 years. They've released a nuclear proposal which would, at best, supply 15% of our energy needs at a cost of $600 billion. It would abandon our climate pollution reduction target. It would provide additional funding for the gas industry. It has already committed to fast-track new gas projects, and it will expand existing projects. It will undermine renewables by cutting funding for essential grid updates, and it will increase pollution. Neither of the political parties is prepared to release climate targets prior to the next federal election. The coalition would in fact scrap the legislated emissions disclosure rules which have been backed by peak bodies and by industry. The Greens have more ambitious targets, but they have no ambitions towards being a party of government. And so I'm asking you guys for your support again. These are crucial times. We are at a tipping point. But we do have choices, and we are poised to benefit massively from the net zero transition and its economic opportunities. My promise to you and to our community is that I will always be your voice on these critical issues, and I will always independently reflect your values and your concerns.
Thank you, Monique. The final speaker, as you are well aware, that we had lined up tonight was Amelia Hamer, the Liberal candidate for Kooyong, who is unfortunately not with us. All candidates were made aware that if they were not coming tonight, then they would be represented by an empty chair. So this notice was given in advance. In the absence of Amelia being with us tonight, a member of the Kooyong Climate Change Alliance, Alex Currell, will be giving an assessment that the Alliance has made of the party's policies as part of the Scorecard Working Group, and will share that assessment of the Liberal Party's policies. Thank you, Alex.
Thanks, Victoria, and hello, everyone. My aim in this talk is to very briefly outline the 7 aspects of Liberal climate policy we assessed for the Kooyong Climate Scorecard. I'll also explain why we rated them as poor in all cases, the lowest score on our scale. The first area we looked at was leadership on the climate emergency. This provides the context for the more detailed policies. Our assessment was focused on the extent to which the magnitude of the problem is recognised and a sense of urgency is conveyed. Liberal policy refers to practical initiatives to address climate change, but there is no mention of the climate emergency nor any attempt to convey the need for urgent action. Peter Dutton has gone so far as to say that it's not a priority to please the people in Paris. The next policy area considered was emissions targets. As I'm sure you're aware, the Liberals have failed to announce a 2030 or 2035 target, committing only to net zero by 2050. The fate of the climate will be determined by cumulative emissions, so this lack of short or medium-term targets is deeply problematic. Moreover, it ignores our international obligations under the Paris Agreement. The third scoring area was the transition of the national electricity grid to renewables. The centrepiece of the Liberals' energy plan is the introduction of nuclear power to the grid. Government-owned power stations would be built at 7 sites by 2050, starting in the mid-2030s. There are major issues with this plan, including assumptions about cost, timing, demand, and waste disposal. But perhaps the key point is that even accepting the extraordinarily optimistic timetable assumed, it would prolong coal-fired generation and, as a result, very significantly drive up total emissions. The Climate Change Authority estimates the increase by 2050 at 1 billion tonnes from the electricity sector, plus a similar additional amount economy-wide. We next looked at the household subsidies on offer for solar panels, batteries and electrification. Here, the Liberals have been strangely silent, perhaps because of potential conflict with their nuclear policy. In the absence of any specific policy commitments or even a more general statement of support for existing subsidies, we could only give a poor score. The fifth policy area was ending approval of new fossil fuel mines. Here the picture is very simple. The Liberals vocally support a ramping up of fossil fuel mining, particularly gas. They've committed to turbocharging mining by accelerating approvals and cutting green tape. This flies in the face of the International Energy Agency's pathway to net zero, which recommends no investment in new fossil fuel supply. Next, we looked at abolition of federal fossil fuel subsidies, which currently stand at an estimated $12.5 billion per annum. Rather than reining in these subsidies, the Liberals propose an expansion. The government's capacity investment scheme has been a key mechanism to drive the transition to renewables in the electricity grid. The Liberals would modify it to include gas. In his budget reply, Peter Dutton announced an additional $1.3 billion of funding for gas-related projects, and there's been talk of more support for gas today. Furthermore, the Liberals have opposed the requirement that Commonwealth investment bodies must consider legislated emissions targets in their decisions. The final area we considered was ending native forest logging nationally. The Liberals have little to say beyond expressing support for protecting jobs in the timber industry and criticising what they characterise as a threat to the industry from Labor and the Greens. They oppose the attempt in Parliament to have logging in areas covered by state and federal forestry agreements subjected to federal environmental approval processes. Overall, I think it's fair to say that the Liberals' policies barely engage with the climate crisis, despite frequent references to zero emissions technology in their deeply flawed nuclear energy policy. However, we'll provide what detail there is on the Lighter Footprints website when we publish the scorecard in the next few days, together with a full explanation of our scoring rationale. Thank you very much.
A huge thank you to Alex for stepping in last minute, and to the Kooyong Climate Alliance for forming the scorecard and doing that work to inform us all today. Thank you so much. We're going to begin with a couple of questions to all of the panel. I'm actually going to begin with the question that was not given to you but has been prepared from Lighter Footprints. Worldwide emissions are rising and the consequences of climate change are being felt everywhere. Senior climate scientists have warned that we are heading towards a climate that will be inhospitable to human civilization. Is it now the time for an emergency response to climate change of the type we've seen during world wars or global pandemics? And I'm going to start with you, Jackie.
I think yes. Absolutely. If there was a time to be responding to this climate emergency with the veracity that we've seen with other other disasters in the past, the best time was years ago, but the second best time is today. We need to be taking the action that this emergency demands. And I can say confidently that we're not at the moment, but we absolutely should be.
And to you, Clive.
Well, Labor definitely does not underestimate or take as not a serious threat that climate change does pose to our society, and that's why we have all of these policies and targets that we've set to drive investment and working with the states and territories as well through the National Energy Transition Partnership. And that's something that sort of came out of COVID and the establishment of National Cabinet, is that all the state and territory and federal energy ministers meet regularly to discuss these things. Unfortunately, if we did set up some sort of war cabinet on the climate emergency, there's not we can't rapidly accelerate the rollout of renewables beyond what the industry and investors are already able to achieve and do under the current framework.
Thank you, Clive. And Monique.
Look, I think we probably do need to adopt a sort of a wartime footing on our approach to climate. And we need to consider the fact that we wouldn't just be talking to climate scientists and to the people involved in the net zero transition. We need to think a bit more widely. So those members of the audience who attended a town hall that I hosted here recently with Rear Admiral Chris Barry, talking about the defence implications of the climate emergency, will remember that it was a frightening evening where he was talking about the number of climate refugees that we could expect to see come to Australia from places, low-lying countries like Bangladesh and countries in the Pacific, in the event of ongoing unabated climate change. We're going to have to include people like health professionals as well, because and people from the insurance industry and from the many other industries which are already being immediately and significantly affected by climate change. I think something like a national cabinet with members of all of those parts of society who are affected by climate, the ongoing and increasing climate emergency would be a really appropriate thing for a government to put in place.
Thank you. The next question was given on notice to all of the candidates. Do you support Australia's current level of fossil fuel subsidies, which in 2023-2024, according to the Australia Institute, was measured at $14.5 billion annually? And why or why not? I'm going the other way. Monique.
Yes, so actually the fossil fuel subsidies, $14.5 billion, one of the top 20 things in the budget that we saw last week, one of the biggest single costs to the government, and about 10 billion of those actually come from the diesel fuel tax credit. And I do not see why the government should be polluting industries which are, while we're putting basically fuel on a fire, which is already, consuming affecting our climate to such a significant extent. So I'm very much in favour, firstly, of removing the fuel tax credit in its current form and limiting it to smaller companies that have one suggestion is to smaller companies so companies can only have a $50 million rebate from that particular tax. I don't see why we're giving money to organisations which are going to pollute our environment and then we will pay the cost of that. It's worth remembering that with the diesel fuel tax credit, $1.4 billion goes to the coal industry. As far as I can tell right now, most of that is going to Australians for Prosperity, which is a coal-favoured funded organisation which is spending that money in the electorate of Kooyong to advertising against people like me and these guys. Basically, it makes no sense. And I think that the vast majority of Australians, I'm sure every single person in this room, is just vehemently opposed to the fact that our government continues to subsidise industries which are doing us harm.
Clive, to you.
Well, yes, as Monique just mentioned, that $14.5 billion figure is made up of a range of policies and programs from not only the federal government but state and territory governments as well, and the almost $10 billion, which is the fuel tax credit scheme, which isn't just coal mining, but also it's for any Australian individuals or corporations who are not using vehicles on public roads, because nominally the fuel excise is collected to help fund the cost of road users using road. It's not directly tied to road maintenance, so that's what it's there for, and it doesn't, it's a long-standing policy that's been renamed a couple of times, and it doesn't really make sense for companies that are using their machinery, be it farm equipment, mining trucks, on private land, to be paying a tax that's for meant to be tied to public roads. So I think the fuel tax credit scheme should remain in its current form, and that makes up the majority of the $14.5 billion figure.
Thank you, Clive. And to you, Jackie.
I think I gave a fair spoiler in my opening remarks that I don't believe we should be subsidising fossil fuel companies, companies that pay little to no tax and essentially are just destroying our planet for profit. So I'm absolutely against providing subsidies to fossil fuel companies.
So now we get to go off-piste. And now we're on to your questions. So that means I'm working off the Slido. If you haven't already put your question in there, get in there now. I see a few of you have been active, very active in the last 15 minutes. Thank you very much. I was getting worried I was going to have to make it up myself. You can also vote on other questions. And what I'm seeing is some real interest in political donations and some concerns. How can we expect to get effective and evidence-based climate policy when special interest donations dominate our politics? And that goes for, I'm seeing reference to fossil fuel companies. It also goes to the influence of billionaires or large funding groups coming together and funding. So I'll start with you, Clive, if I can.
Sure, I'll start in the middle with the one person from the party of government here tonight. So the Albanese government did legislate recently in the sort of closing stages of the parliament some electoral reform in terms of donation disclosures and making those them be disclosed earlier than they previously were and at lower amounts. I think ultimately it's a tricky one, but these massive companies do donate to both major parties, and Labor does take very seriously expert advice and the independent advice of Commonwealth authorities, be it the Climate Change Authority or the Energy Department. That's where we get our advice from. We're not making policy decisions or cabinet decisions or drawing up laws based on who Chris Bowen had lunch with.
Okay. Jackie.
Clive, I applaud you saying that with a straight face. Anyway, our democracy is for sale. That's just the long and short of it, I'm afraid. It doesn't matter whether you're getting donations from fossil fuels, whether you're getting them from the gambling industry, from Simon Holmes à Court. If you have enough money, you can buy a seat in our federal elections. So I believe that we should be taking all donations out of our elections. They should be publicly funded. Everybody should be running on their policies, not how much money they can get, not the corflute war that we see out in Kooyong right now. Money in politics is bad. We need to get rid of it.
Monique.
I guess I'm probably somewhere between those two viewpoints. I mean, the thing is, it costs money to run an election. And you run a federal election, it costs money. There's whether or not you like it, there are costs involved. I don't know that Australian taxpayers want to put a whole lot more money into electoral donations, but I do think that they care about the democratic process in this country. And so I think probably we can start with the first principle, which is that everyone wants to have open and fair elections where there's transparency, where we don't have situations like other countries where we see gerrymandering, and where everyone has the opportunity to put their hand up and potentially be elected to represent their community. It was hugely disappointing that the last piece of legislation that the government passed last year was a stitch-up that it put together with the coalition to actively disadvantage independents and smaller parties in the federal scheme. No offence, Clive, but that's what it was. We have... Yeah, no, he wasn't there. It's true. I was, and it was pretty bad, actually. Yeah, I mean, it was incredibly disappointing to see that. We know that we should be able to apply the ACCC to the political parties because we have a real problem with political duopolies in many levels of government here. So I am in favour of further electoral donation reform. I don't think that I think that whatever we do, we should be very cognizant of the fact that it's not simple, it's not easy, but we want to make things fair and transparent, and that should underpin any reform that we pass at a state or federal level in this country. That hasn't been the case in recent times. I think that if there is a hung parliament after the next federal election, we'll have a move towards that with the legislation that will pass.
Thank you. A bit of a change in the questions from here. We've got a few questions around home battery systems. What are your plans to increase home battery systems? And also, how can you support households in the electorate to be active on climate change and taking action themselves in their own daily lives? Let's start with you, Jackie.
Yep. So we know that one of the biggest barriers for people to take up more climate-sensitive technologies, whether that be in their home or in their businesses, is cost. Cost is the biggest barrier for most people, and so the Greens have committed to providing grants to both individuals and businesses, $5,000 per individual and $10,000 for businesses, small businesses, for that battery storage. We know that we need battery storage to move to our renewable future, and in addition to that, there's low interest loans that people can also engage in as well. So we're very aware that cost is that barrier, and we're very eager to make sure that we can do everything we can to make that transition easy for people.
Thank you. And Monique?
Well, action on climate is action on cost of living in many respects, and for many of the people in Australia who are struggling, the biggest costs that they're dealing with right now are cost of electricity, gas and petrol. And there are things that the government can do. What it needs to do in doing that is make sure that it leaves no one behind. Many of the schemes that are in place right now help people who own their own home, but they're not helping people who are in social or affordable housing or renters. And so there are a range of schemes that are out there which I would be supportive of. The Renew Everything for All is a sort of a umbrella scheme which provides ideas for rebates or subsidies, zero-cost loans or inflation-managed loans for people to get batteries, solar, heat pumps, also energy improvements to homes for renters in particular. There's a range of schemes that the government and the opposition have looked at in the last 12 to 18 months. They haven't pulled the pin on any of them, and it's one of the things I guess we're hoping that we might see in the next 4 weeks from the major political parties.
And you did mention Renew Australia for All. Are you committed to those policies? Yeah,
so there's no specific policy in there, but basically what it talks about is that we could spend $50 billion and improve each of the 7.5, 8 million homes in Australia which hasn't yet been subjected to energy efficiency improvements and to the sorts of electrification measures which will massively bring down energy costs for those homes. That's $50 billion. Seems like a lot. It's a whole lot less than $60 billion for nuclear, providing 15% of our grid in 2050.
And to you, Clive.
So one of the policies that Labor did take to the last election and has been chipping away at and progressing is our policy for 400 community batteries. And that's something that we need to work with the states with local councils, local community groups, as well as the companies that own the distribution networks, City Power, Powercore, etc. So I think a number of those have been installed, and we'll continue working towards that in a second term. Another thing to mention is that the Allen State Labor Government and other Labor governments around the country are doing a lot of work in providing solar rebates and rebates for batteries and the sort of like low interest loans or zero interest loans that were mentioned before. And we've amended laws and planning schemes in Victoria to make it possible for renters, and I'm aware it's a federal election, but the Labor, this is an area that the state has the sort of policy directive and power on to give renters the opportunity to install solar panels. So, yeah.
We have a couple of questions about logging. Logging native forests releases huge amounts of carbon. This person is claiming research shows ending logging alone would allow Australia to achieve its 2030 climate targets. I can't verify that, but it would certainly make a significant dent. Why are we still logging, and what would your party do about it? I'll start at the end again.
Good question. Why? Obviously, as a representative from the Greens, we want to see the end of native forest logging. We've been fighting for that for decades, since our inception. We've achieved that here in Victoria, and several states around the country have also legislated that. It is a state issue, but we want to push those state governments from the federal level to make sure that they also outlaw them. There is no reason we are logging our native forests. They are our carbon sinks. They're what keeps us alive. There is, no excuse for it, and we'll definitely be pushing to end it.
To you, Clive.
Yeah, as Jackie said, the Labor government here in Victoria has ended native forest logging, and in other states and territories, and that's also something Labor would like to see across the country, because not only are they carbon sinks, they're very important habitats and for biodiversity for native animals and plants as well. So was the question on native logging or logging as a whole?
Well, it was native forest logging, but let's go logging as a whole.
Well,
old growth, but also you can take it where you like, Clive.
Well, I'll stick to native logging, establish native logging, because ultimately logging is as an industry and in particular plantation logging, we need wood to build houses, But yeah, native logging is definitely something that I would like to see, and the Labor Party would like to see expanded, not outside of Victoria.
And Monique,
the end of native logging.
Thank you very much. Just before you answer, I have just seen a comment that was really far down in the questions. Apologies for anyone who wasn't able to hear us. All of us will make sure we are also projecting and using our diaphragms into the microphones for those at the back with some hearing issues. So thank you for letting me know. Apologies.
Yeah, apologies. I'm probably the worst at that. So native forest logging was taken out of that used to be under the auspices of the federal government, but was taken away from them with the regional forestry agreements and carved out of the Environmental Protection Biodiversity Conservation Act some time ago, a generation ago, and that's been an absolute disaster. We know that the Labor state government has claimed that it has ended native forest logging in Victoria some time ago, in the last couple of years. That hasn't happened. There's still a massive amount of salvage logging that is ongoing and which is unsupervised. I've taken multiple examples of that to the Federal Environment Minister on multiple occasions in the last 2 years and asked her to act on this as part of the EPBC overhaul, which you'll remember was blocked by the PM just before Christmas in an attempt to placate the WA state voters. So basically, we have failed to protect native forests in Victoria and other states of Australia. What we need to do is take native forestry back as a federal. Under federal oversight. The Victorian State Government has on multiple occasions demonstrated that it has no interest in active oversight of this issue. It needs to be a federal issue, and we need to actually, if we had a functional EPA, mandate that we do not log native forests anymore.
With the absence of the Liberal Party candidate here tonight, the questions for nuclear, which are still in here. So it's interesting to note that would have been a driver of a broader discussion around nuclear quite clearly. But I think it is worth touching on because there's a few different angles that are coming up here. The first comment is that we need urgent reform of our energy system. How can we in good conscience not support nuclear energy? Others worried that does the AUKUS agreement open pathways to supporting nuclear, and others asking for total clarity around your positions on nuclear. I'll start with you, Monique.
What was the first one?
How could we not have nuclear?
Oh, because we need urgent action. Well, yeah, that's the issue. We do need urgent action. I think we're in furious agreement on that. So I sat on the Parliamentary Nuclear Committee. I didn't think it was the answer, but I thought I owed it to our community to be 100% sure on that. I'm technology agnostic about how we get to net zero. I just think we need to do it quickly, effectively, and cost in an economic way. And having sat through 4 months of committee hearings, I can tell you it would take too long and it is too expensive. It's that simple. There's just no way we would get it before 2045, and it would cost way, way more than has been suggested. You know, as much as $600 billion. It would stop the transition to renewables. It's never going to happen. There's a deep degree of cynicism there from the coalition. They have no real belief that it will ever happen, and it is appallingly bad that they have visited this upon people in the last couple of years.
To you, Clive.
Labor does not support nuclear power generation. That's a long-standing policy that we have had for decades, and we will not, urgent action on reducing emissions and let's build nuclear power plants are completely at odds with one another, because this is a technology that would take decades to build before it can come online. The site that's been nominated in Queensland doesn't even have enough water to prevent a meltdown, and would cost the taxpayer hundreds of billions for something that's going to make a tiny dent into the electricity mix and will prolong the use of fossil fuels. So no, Labor does not support nuclear power generation.
And do you... In light of the AUKUS agreement, do you have any concerns about how that may impact Labor's position?
I don't have concerns about how AUKUS, which is an agreement for a military alliance agreement with the US and the UK to buy conventionally armed nuclear-powered submarines, I don't see that then somehow influencing our energy policy, and that we would abandon our position on nuclear power.
Let's hope that doesn't also create any additional issues with waste, which is obviously a key part of this debate as well. Over to you, Jackie.
Yeah, I'm glad to see that we're all singing from the same song sheet in terms of nuclear. We all recognise it for what it is, and that's a distraction. The Liberals didn't have a climate policy, so they thought they'd throw this bomb out there, and now we're all talking about it and distracted from the real issues. And that is just a real, commentary on what the Liberal Party is bringing to this election, distraction. Speaking to AUKUS, and I'm glad you've had that follow-up question, Victoria, to Clive, because I completely forgot that part of the question. It's very difficult when you're down the end. So our policy as the Greens is we need to get out of AUKUS immediately. We cannot tie ourselves to Trump's United States. And again, the question of what we're going to do with that nuclear waste, that's not something we should be entertaining. AUKUS needs to end, and nuclear is just a no-go.
We are coming towards the end of the evening. And as much as we all love a democracy festival, I also know you all want to get home to bed on time. So we're going to try and wrap on time. I'm going to finish up, though, with a question that I will ask each of you individually. So a separate question for each candidate based on where you're at and where your party is at. Jackie, starting with you. The Greens should be in safe territory when it comes to environmental policy, and in some ways a night like this is a bit of a gimme. And yet, under this last term of government, we've failed to see the Greens secure the progress on our environment that many people might have hoped for. You are not in government, and the best you could hope for would be to secure commitments through compromise, yet at times the Greens have been accused of holding out and preventing compromise solutions. Why should the people of Kooyong vote for you to be their best voice as a candidate at this election?
So, yeah, these forums are a bit of a gimme for the Greens, I will admit that. That being said, if you put more Greens into the next term of Parliament, then you are going to have more people that are fighting for immediate climate action. You can say what you want about the Greens blocking particular legislation or whatnot, but that's never for bad reason. And we always achieve better outcomes when we push for more. We know that we need Labor to act further and faster on the climate crisis. They're just not getting it done, and they need people pushing them. If we have a team of Greens in Parliament doing that, then we're going to get there faster. So we need more people in our Parliament fighting for the planet, and that's what the Greens are there to do.
Clive, to you. The ALP was elected on a commitment to act on climate and to strengthen nature laws. Yet we are seeing an expansion of coal and gas projects in this country. And just last week, the Albanese government not just failed to strengthen our environmental laws, but actually wound them back and is likely to cause the extinction of a prehistoric creature, the Maugean skate, which is now in the unenviable position of perhaps being the only species that has survived the extinction event that ended the dinosaurs, but may not survive the Albanese government. Why should the people of Kooyong vote for you to be their candidate?
So Labor was elected at the last election on a platform of climate action and strengthening environment laws. 2 tranches of that environment legislation to amend the EPBC Act did pass Parliament, and the 3rd tranche was failed to get passed in the Senate in August of last year, thanks to the Liberals and the Greens teaming up to block it. The Maugean skate is, currently the EPBC Act was changed in order to protect the salmon industry in Tasmania because this is specifically in a very small community in Tasmania where these communities would potentially not survive if it were not for these jobs that people depend on and then flows on into the local economy as well. The Maugean skate has we've been working with the state government and other bodies and had quite a successful breeding program and getting the oxygen levels in the harbour back up. So hopefully it will not come to going extinct when it survived the prehistoric period.
Thank you, Clive. And Monique, your election along with the other Teal independents, heralded what many hoped would be a new phase for political representation on the issues that matter to people. And yet, in your time in Canberra, Australia has continued to fail to live up to our potential for climate and environmental action. You are also not in government, and therefore could be described as being impotent in your ability to be able to deliver any real outcome. There are also many predicting that this could be a minority government, and Jackie was pretty clear on where the Greens stand at the start. The front runner of that is pretty unclear, so I'm actually going to, because of your position, give you two questions. Firstly, if there was a hung parliament, who would you be supportive? And why, when Australia hasn't delivered what is necessary in this term, should the people of Kooyong vote for you for a next term?
Thank you. Well, I guess the first thing is that I actually think the Greens have made a grave mistake in saying that they would inevitably support Labor in the event that neither of the major political parties was able to form government after the federal election. And the reason for that is that in that situation, we wouldn't know who the leaders of the parties might be. There could well be a change. And it could be a time to bring people to the table and to argue or to meet collaboratively, pragmatically and productively to talk about the things that the people of Australia want. Now, no one wants chaos in government, but I think most people in this room and elsewhere, when I talk to them, want people who are elected representatives to work together in the best interest of our country. And I think that that's what would happen if we had a situation where neither of the major parties could form government after May the 3rd. I think that if were I there, I would speak with the leaders of both parties if they wanted to speak to me, and I would ask them what they would offer the community of Kooyong. I've talked to so many of you over the last 3 years about what you need and what you want and what you value and what you hold important. And I would ask them to provide me with convincing evidence that they had mature and coherent policies about those things. And then I would offer confidence and supply to whichever leader was best able to make his or her case on that. And I would remain utterly independent thereafter, other than on matters of confidence and supply. And so that's why people should vote for me. And people should vote, I think, in the election for people who represent their community, not a party, not a lobby group, not a faction, not Gina Rinehart, their community.
Lynn is coming to the stage to wrap us up, but I want to give, because I've got the microphone, I want to give one last question to all of our candidates, but I'm giving you 1 minute each. Bellkeeper, 1 minute each for this last one, because I want to bring back in the voice of young people here tonight, because opening with Ivy helped frame what we're actually all here for and what we're about. We have a question in here from someone who says, I am a first-time voter. I care about climate because I know that future generations will bear the brunt. Why should I vote for you? 1 minute each. Clive, I'm starting with you.
Well, Labor is the only party of government in Australia that has shown and demonstrated consistently, not only in this term, but when we were last in government, that we are serious and committed to acting on climate change, whereas the Liberals will simply deny it and bury their head in the sand. So yes, vote for Labor in the House and the Senate if you want to continue to see Australia act on climate change rather than pursuing some unrealistic nuclear nonsense.
Jackie, to you.
So since our inception in 1992, the Greens are the party of the environment and of climate action. That alone should be why you should vote for the Greens. But I guess to follow up on something that Clive said, we will be there to push Labor further and faster on climate action because they're not doing it themselves. And we need to keep the Liberals out and force Labor to act. And that's why you should be voting for the Greens.
And to you, Monique.
Every 2 years, the government puts out a report into intergenerational inequity, and every 2 years it gets worse. So young people in Australia are facing a climate crisis, but they're also facing a cost of living crisis, a housing crisis, and a HECs crisis. We have an ageing population and a narrowing tax base, and they are going to bear the brunt of that. People like me care about that, and that's why we will advocate as best we can and as effectively as we can for effective tax reform, as well as effective action on climate change and all those other challenges that the young people of Australia should not be left alone to bear.
A huge thank you to all of our candidates. It has been wonderful to be able to have this conversation with you tonight, for those of you who turned up. For the audience, thank you so much.